Hello, welcome to the 8th session of the 8th Native Prairie Restoration Reclamation Workshop. This session will focus on planning, and it is being recorded. I'm Caitlin Monroe-Seiler with PCAP, and I will be your session moderator today. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities past and present. For a millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. I'm honored to introduce Tyler Hobson from our event platinum sponsor, the Mosaic Company, and Tyler will be introducing our first speaker. Before I pass it over to Tyler, I'd like to mention that we've had some technical difficulties, so I'm going to ask everyone to turn the volume of your computer right up so you can hear our speaker, Carol. But I'd like to pass it over to Tyler, and you just need to unmute yourself, Tyler. Oh, you've got it.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Crowe is the founder and president of Indigenous Visions Incorporated. Since 2002, her company has been providing services in environmental monitoring and consultation on traditional lands, facilitation of complex lands and rights issues, and an array of leadership and environmental training programs. Carol is an inspiring Indigenous advocate dedicated to protecting Mother Earth through monitoring and reducing human impacts on land, water, air, soil, and sacred places. Carol is a certified Building Environmental Aboriginal Human Resources, or BEAR, trainer, delivering culturally relevant hands-on environmental training in partnership with Indigenous nations. And over the past decade, Carol has delivered more than 40 BEAR training programs with over 400 graduates, providing mentorship to Indigenous learners across the country. Carol's work as an instructor ranges from university classrooms to local boreal forest floors. However, always focused on 7-generational thinking and community-based environmental stewardship. Her expertise lies in environmental science, traditional and cultural use studies, GIS mapping, Indigenous community-based consultation, facilitation of Indigenous rights, and land use planning. Carol is also president of Friends of the Park at Prince Albert National Park, where her volunteer work is to raise awareness and create a legacy of her role model and Auntie Anahero. Carol is a recipient of the Global Women of Vision Award in Business and an Esquire Award from the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women. Today, Carol works to organize grassroots seasonal women's healing gatherings. She is an alumni of the Governor General's study conferences. And with that, please go ahead, Carol. Thank you.
So I think I left it off. I was just sharing that our company does provide environmental and land-based education. And the courses are really growing with BEAR. They tend to customize and develop according to the needs of the community. And this is something that I've really found that a lot of communities want to move more towards sustainability. You know, climate change is a huge conversation. Just hearing the last presentation, and somebody asking about seed, these are all conversations that are happening in communities. And of course, just how energy is managed as well. Thank you for the introduction, Tyler, earlier. I'm originally from Pikwakanagan. It's in a Algonquin community in Ontario, but I'm married into Treaty 4. My husband's from Kakawishtahow, and my children are also registered there. I've been blessed to work for the last 20 years on Indigenous issues that really have resulted, of course, from the duty to consult, and the whole reason why we're even doing environmental monitoring and where it really started from, with the intent that we would start to look at how do we mitigate impacts to sacred and cultural sites, but it's so much bigger than that in what I've experienced, because it really relates to all the environmental issues that we're seeing today and concerns, because there is that long-term perspective from elders. And of course, I do a lot of volunteer work, which is a big part of my life. I've been blessed to have a lot of land-based education, and that's both from growing up the woman, I don't know if anybody recognizes who the woman at the left top corner is, but that's Anna Harrio. She was married to Gray Owl, and that's actually my auntie. She's buried in Prince Albert National Park. She stopped the inhumane trapping of beaver. And interesting enough, one of the reasons that we moved here was because she rests in the park. And it was out of a request from an auntie in Ontario, her sister, who said, go up and see where they lived. I never had a chance. But I've also learned from elders, there's, the respect for the gravesites. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because that's become a big concern for communities in terms of where are these gravesites and how do we honor them on the land. And that affects everything that we're doing. So I've really been blessed. That's a picture of my husband there and myself, and one of my dad as a child, growing up on a trap line and really growing up in a forestry world. All the other pictures are pictures I've taken just of wildlife through our travels, and it's just a big part of our life. The other environmental role model that I have is nature. And as many of you know, the beaver brings back wetlands, restores them. In southern parts of the province, in Treaty 4 area, there is some concerns with water. There is a lot of loss of wetlands that we all know about, and there continues to be. I was actually at a session a couple years ago, and I regret not asking the elder's name. He mentioned it, and then I didn't pay attention enough to take his name and follow up with him. But he said to me that, the moose have come down to the south. The moose are moving here, and we see them eating the grain, and we know that it's just a matter of time that they start to get sick from that. It's not good for them. They need their natural plants. And, having grown up in Northern Ontario, and my parents or my dad, hunting by canoe and going out on the lake, in the wetlands, and, sharing with us about the different plants that those moose were diving down to eat, and all the different medicines that were there to help the moose live, a good long life. Well, that elder in southern Saskatchewan said to me, the moose will get sick if something doesn't change. But he said, Mother Nature will look after that. Mother Earth will look after that, because after she sent the moose, she sent the water. And then after the water started to show up, she sent the beaver. She said the problem is that we'll interrupt that. We'll stop those beaver from showing up, because where they're going to dam up and try and restore water is where we have, places, roads, buildings. No one wants those wrecked. And I was so, this has been a part of my journey, is learning from elders and just having all of this wisdom shared with me, and just in awe of it, because it's such a critical part of how we look at the environment. I've, one of the areas that I think it's really important when you're working with any Indigenous community is to know that they're all different. And, with more than 608 First Nations in Canada, in Saskatchewan alone, there's 70 First Nations, and there's Métis communities as well. So when you look at, even in Treaty 4, there's 33 First Nation communities that have, knowledge of the land in that area. But I do know from the work that I've been doing where we all need to start, because I think, as I talk about the inclusion, which I'm going to get into in a minute, is just really that recognition of the treaties, knowing those treaties, understanding what those treaties mean, also understanding truth and reconciliation, because if you look at the action, the call to action, there's 94 calls to action, and so much to do with the environment, but also, rebuilding that relationship with Indigenous communities, and learning also about the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, because that, again, allows a conversation so that Indigenous people can be back out on the land in areas that previously they were, could no longer access. So that reconciliation is, it's that rekindling also of Indigenous people's relationship with the land through culture, language, ceremony, and that opportunity to speak about it and overcome the depression, because there was a time when bringing up following the animals, or looking to the animals to what kind of medicines they use in a Western setting wouldn't be regarded as knowledge. This is a picture I always like to share, because this is actually how I ended up in the environmental field. I worked in the oil and gas industry. I actually started out in telecommunications, and then I was in oil and gas for 5 years in this is pictures in northern BC. And I was involved with a seismic project. We had a CAD operator, and we had some elders and monitors way before actually the BEAR program had been developed. Monitors were basically going out and flagging, but there wasn't really any clear direction on who spoke up when and how that process actually worked in the field. We just set it up so that they would have daily conversations with their tailgate meetings, have conversations about how development would happen. In this one particular day, the elder and monitor had flagged this beaver feeding ground that you're seeing in the picture. And in the back there, you can see that there's a seasonal lodge. The CAD operator who's has to have so many kilometers done a day was in a bit of a panic and not wanting to avoid this. So he called his boss. His boss called BC Environment. BC's Environment said, "There's lots of beaver. We're not concerned about them. Don't worry about it." They plowed through it anyways, and the elder and monitor were prepared to shut down our project. The president of the company asked me to get on a plane and get out there and talk to the trapper and elder. The elder and monitor, and who was also a trapper. When I got there, he shared these pictures with me, and he said, "Please, just share these and educate," because he said, "You've destroyed critical moose habitat." And I said, "Oh, I thought this was about the beaver." And he said, "It is." He said, "You see all those trees falling in this picture? You can see that the bark's all chewed off. That black poplar bark is what helps the moose. That's a medicine so that they can calve. And the feeding ground allows the moose to move in there while they're calving without worrying about predators, because predators tend to avoid these fallen areas." And that really changed, my worldview. It changed my perspective, even though I had grown up, with knowledge. Certainly you don't have it all, and as elders teach you the interconnection and their long-term observation, you just can't replace. So it was a real eye-opener for me, and that really led me back to university and a real shift in careers. Since I've been building and working in this capacity area, there's been a lot more conversation around Indigenous-led conservation. And there's a few reasons for that. I think one of the biggest reason is because in order for communities to really decolonize, that there's no more control over how they view a project or view the land, it allows us to really ensure that the knowledge holders can bring in ceremony, can bring in their ways of knowing, their ways of reading the land like a book, and that's exactly what they do. It's quite amazing. So our monitors, when they're out there, their role really is to collect some baseline data, GPS waypoints, catalog anything that they see of concern. And I can see where a lot of the presentations here would be so valuable to our monitors, because that's a great way for them to learn the whole Western science. And that's what we want them to do. We want them to know both Western science and traditional knowledge, so that when they're going out there, they can really help to reduce impacts, and maybe take a little less of a way than we are today. So they look at the past, the present, the future. And their role, what I've seen, is so critical in that mitigation, because some of the issues that come out when you're looking at a project might not be till construction or you're actually out there developing. So basically looking at all aspects, the watershed, particularly the riparian zones where all of, the native plants are. And that's really where we look in terms of when we're monitoring. We really look close to water areas because that's where a lot of the medicines tend to be as well. And as in terms of soil, air, human health, again, that's just as important for them to look at those aspects. So the monitor, working with both worlds, they get a good understanding of how the two can work together. And the way I look at it is, the Western scientist has the numbers. He has the observation and that experiment to say, what the data is. The knowledge holders have the story to say, how is the land feeding us? Is it, is it healthy? Is it, can the plants, are they looking the same? Do they taste different? Do they smell different? All of these aspects should match each other, so that story and that data working together becomes very important. And the other reason that, Indigenous-led opportunities are so important is also because of the risk of, cultural exploitation, and that the actual knowledge is transferred to a community member. I can imagine environment company or anyone working in the field to work with a knowledge holder is golden. Like, it's such a beautiful experience, and they teach you so much. But there's such a great opportunity to see this being, given to our youth, transferred to our youth, especially in a job. And that ensures that they will continue to learn their cultural aspects, have that knowledge passed down to them, because where does that happen? It happens, as a child. It happens for walks with aunties and uncles and relatives. It's all part of, daily life. But it also involves spiritual laws, and those ceremonies and that cultural respect require great care. How I always address that, even though I have some knowledge, I'm a helper and I'm there to help. But when I go into a community and I'm, having a knowledge holder, elder involved, I also get a helper from the community as well, because that helper will know those protocols. It's, I want to make sure I respect them. So that allows me to make sure that elder isn't getting even exploited by me. I may ask them by mistake questions that I shouldn't be asking them, perhaps, and that just makes it a lot easier. So that knowledge is the intellectual property of a community, and it is passed through kinship. So there has to be a way for this relationship on the land. So that's where we find the monitoring program is working really well. One of the concepts that I learned from Elder Reg Crowe, and I'm actually going to be seeing him this afternoon in another session. I haven't seen him in quite a long time, but he always mentioned this concept of foreign policy. So when you go into a community, just think of it that way. If you're not sure how things are working, ask. And I just share that because I think it's important that, as all of you are potentially working with communities or are now, that can really make a huge difference for you. So sharing sacred traditional knowledge and ceremony becomes really important. And in the past, of course, that wasn't feasible and it was illegal. And I always like to mention that too, because some people aren't aware of that. One of the protocols that I always think of is Matthew Whitehead, late Matthew Whitehead from Treaty 8 in Alberta. He always used a term called Indigenous Indicators. So it's a way of looking at the land to see, the health of it. And those Indigenous indicators are different from Western indicators, and they involve story. And, it will be different. It's not that branch of knowledge per se, but it's an environmental philosophy, and it's just a way of life and stewardship. So when we're looking at the land, we always assess it from the past, present, future. What did it look like in the past? What I'm really excited about is that there's a lot of technology now that we can use even in the field to do more assessments to see what it would have looked like in the past as well. What's going on there now in the present, especially around native plants, native medicines, and acknowledging that everything has a spirit. One thing I've learned is thinking that we live in 3 seasons, but when you work with the Northern Cree here in Saskatchewan, they actually have 6 seasons. So getting to know, what those different seasons bring and how it affects the environment is so interesting. But our monitors are looking for pathways of contaminants. And, knowing that water is life and the contaminants are passed through water source, we will always want them to know what contaminants might be present where they're working, or in the water, in the soil as well. So, but one of the things that we've learned is we do need access to those knowledge holders and Western scientists. It's a lot easier to get access to a Western science as a monitor out in the field when you're working on a project. It's really hard to get knowledge holders because we really don't have anything in place yet. And I see a question from Julie. When does the relationship move helper to knowledge holder? That's a really good question. I think it's I think it's the way that elders are looked to in the community and their roles given through ceremony. So they might be asked to take on more roles within ceremony, but I think there's also a level that, and that's why I separate it sometimes from knowledge holder and elder, because not every knowledge holder will become an elder per se. But we also think of our knowledge holders also as the hunters, the fishermen, the people who are gathering medicines. I hope that helps. So I want to give you an example of a project that I worked on down in Treaty 4 with Pasqua First Nation. We were looking at Line 3. We had a small portion of the pipeline to look at for Pasqua, or with them, I should say, and we really involved the elders. But some of the first questions that we wanted to know is, just what's the life cycle of the pipeline, so that as we are assessing it, we know, how long it's going to be there. That varied in perspectives. So we heard up to 50 years. And we weren't sure how to measure the effects of it. But when we looked at UNDRIP, we looked at it for the life of the pipeline and recognized, the rights of Indigenous people are conservation and protection. And that there needs to be, certainty that no storage or disposal of hazardous materials shall take place on the land. And that there's a way to monitor, maintain, and restore health of Indigenous people. And so for me, this is for everybody, because the more, participation in Indigenous-led programs and initiatives, we're going to start addressing a lot of these questions and articles that focus on protection of the land. So when we were going out there, we were accompanied by staff most of the time from the company, and asked to identify areas of concern. The elders did ceremony first. And that ceremony is very important because, again, it allows us to, when we get out there, to use our Indigenous indicators, because when we get there, we're offering tobacco, we're speaking to the land and asking the land also to help us understand what's there. So different from an environmental sweep where you might just, we still use those Western eyes and identify what we've learned through, a sweep. But at the same time, the ceremony always brings out the unexpected. So when we got to the site, and and had offered tobacco, I said to the elder, I have a feeling we need to go on the other side of the road. And we were informed that other side of the road was private land. The elder said, well, we should still go look at it if this, if this is the insight that we're hearing from Carol. So let's do that. So we went to the other side. The rain started coming down just ever so lightly. In the pond there, see on the next page. Oh, I think I have a picture after. There was a small pond, and I could see that there was a spring. I could see that there was a spring there on the side of the hill. And the elder said, go and GPS that. We'll collect that as well. And these northern leopard frogs just started jumping out everywhere. It was like they heard us, and they just came out from everywhere. And so we were quite excited to see that this species at risk was there, and probably this spring was pretty important. So we flagged all that. We GPSed it. And then during construction, unfortunately, they hit the spring, and we were quite shocked because we had a team out there. We had GPSed it. We had you can see it here. See if I've got the picture of the hill the other way. I think I do. Okay, there you can see it. So our understanding was that they weren't even going to go through that area on the hill because we had said there was a spring. So when we went and sat down with the company and the construction folks and the elder and our archaeologist and our monitor, we found out that they didn't really believe our data. They really didn't believe there was a spring there. In fact, when they came back the next day, after we had said northern leopard frogs were there, they didn't see anything. They didn't see any frogs. Mind you, the conditions were quite hot and dry, so I'm guessing that's part of why they wouldn't have seen the leopard frogs. But it was quite upsetting because we knew then that there wasn't a lot of respect for the knowledge that we were sharing. So on the Western Science side, I immediately connected with somebody at Environment Canada in Edmonton under the Species at Risk Act. And he had some expertise in northern leopard frogs. And he sent me some articles and gave me some advice saying that, there's not a lot of studies about northern leopard frogs. I'm guessing that they're overwintering right where you are, because this was in August and they need a running spring to overwinter, but there's no way of telling if they're there. And the construction itself will likely, end up with fatality, but you'll never know. The setback for distances for the northern leopard frog were quite short. They were only a few meters. And the other concern we have was that the mitigation measure was, if you see a northern leopard frog, throw it out of the right of way, throw it over the fence. So for the elders, that was quite concerning, and they weren't happy to see that because it really didn't, do anything for the frog and make sure that frog was safe. So we seen the water, it pooled, as you can see at the bottom there of the picture. The water started to pool. Clearly, they used some bentonite clay. I actually phoned Sask Water and talked to them or not Sask Water, the other group. I know they're a different name now. And I asked them about, is this an artesian well issue? Is there any concerns here? And they said, you should be treating it like an artesian well because it is a spring. There could be somebody down, the road who might want to get a well someday, or they're on that. And tell them don't use the bentonite clay that they've already cleared because it's probably already contaminated. Make sure that they patch it up properly. And, it was a very difficult process because we were jumping into some of the areas that we weren't even sure how do you stop a spring from, flowing. Once it's flowing, does it just bleed out? That's what our elders tell us, did you hit an artery or did you hit a vein? So it was quite a big concern. they did ceremony. We continued on, but we were pretty sure that there was definitely impact. And we had talked to some of the folks that were working on some of the previous data collection, and they told us off the record that there's a lot of springs being hit and a lot of leopard frogs. So I was a little bit concerned about the off the record part, because remember at the beginning I mentioned, you know, if you write business and community on page, there shouldn't be a line between those two. You know, we really have to have the same integrity in both places in our worldviews. So, you know, the aha moments were, well, there was a desktop review done in 2015. That's, you know, a 2-year gap for us. That was a little much, or sorry, 3-year gap. And we just didn't have a lot of time to review the project. We didn't have a lot of credibility with government and industry for traditional ecological knowledge, even though we were really excited about it and enjoyed being out there and doing the work. We've learned a lot, and we know we have a long way to go, and we have a lot of work ahead of us to make this you know, smoother. So communication is definitely key. And long-term observations are such an asset. And that's one thing I've discovered, there isn't a lot of long-term observations. And yes, Ashley, exactly. There is a lot of disconnect. That was one of the things we actually asked if we could have radio so we could hear the construction team, you know, because we could only really see them far away, watching them and monitoring them, but we weren't allowed in on their radios. So that made it even hard too. And yes, May, yeah, the timing of data collection for sure, because again, that 4 seasons is how they look at it. When you talk to an elder, they think about all those 4 seasons and what might be there, what animals, what plants, you know, what medicines. And of course, repatriation of cultural artifacts. We never did get to finish that. We didn't get to that point, but I know Pasqua would still like to address that, because it would be incredible to see museums in every nation of their artifacts. What one really positive thing that did happen was this beautiful buffalo bison rock is very sacred to the community in southern Saskatchewan in Treaty 4. These are found in many places. This particular one was actually out of the right of way. So the fact that the company was willing to move it and take it to a sacred place. So there is a knowledge holder elder who does sweats and community initiatives just outside of Regina, and it's at his place. So this sits there. So it could be something that the group might want to go see sometime. So Madison is asking, from your experience, what are the first few steps you take when you are invited into a new unknown First Nation? That's a really good question. So I always like to get to know the community as much as I can before I go. I mean, YouTube's incredible. You can find some good, you know, films, learn as much as you can, films, old school, videos, learn as much as you can, and, you know, about their history if you can. There's not a lot out there, but really, you know, dive into it. Find someone that you gravitate to and that you're just connecting with, and stay in touch with them. You know, that's the best way to approach it. And always follow up, because I find that I hear this from communities all the time. They'll say, oh, that company came out, or that group came out. They talked to us. They said they'd follow up with us, and we never hear back. Or they said they'd share their report. We don't hear back. I don't necessarily think that's a flaw necessarily with individuals, as much as I've learned it's a flaw in Canada that we have. I'll just throw that out there, because I think we got to get better at follow-up, because that is the most important aspect when you're building a relationship with the community, and get involved. You know, if you can get involved with cultural events or activities locally, that just makes such a difference for building good long-term relationships. And yeah, I think it was May or somebody earlier said, you know, yeah, that early engagement, for sure. We should have been out there much sooner, and that would have really helped us. And we should have visited it the Four Seasons. We never have that luxury. And yes, May, exactly. You know, humility. Be honest. Tell them you don't know. And I love that. I appreciate that, because even myself, I'm always an outsider. Even though I'm an Indigenous woman, I'm going into a community that I'm not from. And I'm hoping I'm going to be adopted by the time I leave, which happens often. That's just the way of life in an Indigenous community. So all of you could end up being very close as well. So just knowing that we have that opportunity for the long-term relationships. And this, at the end of the report, after we had submitted our final report for the mitigation and construction phase, after we had identified all the locations, and those are the locations that we monitored and watched during the construction phase, only to find out that we're the only ones watching them. The elder clearly said, you know, even the way we write a report, we can't continue to write it the way we've been writing it. We need this report to really capture the understanding of First Nations people in an Indian spiritual way. So that's what we did. We included a lot of their views, their perspectives on what should happen next, how we should approach it, how we should deal with the long-term aspect of the frogs, the spring, and we wrote it that way. I don't think a lot's been done with it, but we know it's a start. So the elder had, you know, expressed his concerns, not only because of, you know, his work there, but in ceremony, he told us that those frogs were definitely there and needed protection. And, you know, we wanted to see a better process of how that knowledge could be incorporated and respected, but also that knowledge of those locations that we had should have been submitted to, well, which is now the Canada Energy Regulator, but then it was the NEB at that point. And we wish that information would have went there, because it didn't. And I also want to just mention again, gravesites, because when we look at the past, that's something that's very important. And this is something that, the late Elder Lindsay Sear brought up, is today, you know, that gravesites are honored with a flower day, and that's because they're, you know, in a cemetery. But what about those graves that are all over the land? And we found some, and many were already GPSed from previous projects. So again, just the importance of having that involved. Here's just to highlight a couple of our monitors. Jennifer Wolf is from Treaty 4, from Muskowgan. She took this program a number of years ago, and today is a pipeline inspector, and continues to, you know, have her to live in her homeland, to be on the land, but also to do these roles, which is great. And she's really enjoying it. So she's been a real role model for others. Another one is Christopher Lara from Cowsis First Nations. He's also been this program, and he felt the same thing. You know, it really helped him to strive to be a steward. And he said that, you know, he really felt it connected for him, you know, because we involve the values and the teachings through the elders, but we also take a, you know, bit of a non-colonial perspective and make sure that we're creating ethical space for the success of our students. And, you know, this is the reality. We all have a duty here. I was going to share this story, but I think I will another time just because of timing. I'm going to leave it there for today, but I just wanted to say, you know, thank you. I wanted to give a bit of a broad overview, but with a specific example of what I've seen out there. I know that it's not perfect yet. We're not there. We do need some Indigenous-led programs. We do need everyone to see the knowledge holders for that wisdom and ask them how it should be led. And I've been so blessed to work with some incredible PhDs, Western scientists, who just see how important this is, and they are so ready to make it work. So I'm really happy to be working in this area. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for the presentation and dealing with all of the IT issues. I know we've met before, but technology, can't live with it, can't live without it.
True.
I know that you're really tight on time today, and you've been doing a great job of answering questions as you go throughout the presentation. I'll just ask one or two if that's okay. Let's see here. We've actually had quite a few people typing in. I'm not sure if you can see the screen here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience. There's another one about thanks for sharing your openness and stories. We've got one question here. It's a bit lengthy, so it's nice to see you present again. I was wondering if you've ever felt tokenized or alienated when working in largely white spaces. I worry about preparing my students for this, but I also know it shouldn't be on them to adapt, but on us to be welcoming. Are there any specific protocols for those of us who work with you to make Indigenous folks feel more welcome?
Wow, yeah, those are some incredible questions, and I think that would take us a bit to really dive into that. Yes, I have felt alienated, but I've always, and I haven't felt tokenized only because I was very fortunate early in my career that I had some good advice from elders, and that was to I always worked directly for senior people. I didn't get pushed down into the organization where I really couldn't make change or decisions or affect decisions. I think that really helped a lot. But having that access to the elders for me was everything, because when I wasn't sure what I was doing or wasn't sure how to approach something, they were always there for me. And how can you prepare your students? Is just, focus on that ethical space of allowing people to have time for conversation, especially if they're students, giving them a lot of space and even one-on-one, because it's hard for young people to feel confident. I can get them really super confident in the classroom. And that's something that I always promote with young people, introduce, don't be afraid. I know you're afraid, but it's a safe place. You're going to get up and introduce yourself, And what I see is that they start to come out, but I know when they get out to the field or they get into those company situations, they're not going to be as strong as they were in that classroom. And so just having some kind of network, a lot of groups do put networks together where, they're supporting one another as Indigenous learners, not without having to, separate it per se, but, creating that space. And I see that. Hi, Shirley. So I hope that helps, but I think that's a big one, and that's a lot of conversation, but feel free to reach out to me, Elizabeth, if you want to have some more dialogue around that, because I could give you some more specific ways that you might want to, make your students feel a little bit more comfortable. And one good way is always to have an elder, not at every session, but to open it and have them come from time to time so that they know what the content is, because having an elder just come for prayer isn't giving them a real role. It's giving them the role of ceremony and creating that, important foundation for the Creator to, help us along the way. But they need to know what we're doing so that they can give us, some direction as well.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. I understand you're really tight on time and you've got a class to get to. So I just want to thank you again for the fantastic presentation. I know a lot of our listeners have questions, so I'm going to encourage them to reach out directly to you then. And we can move on with. Thank you, Carol. Have a great rest of your day.
For sure. Thank
Sorry about this, Julie. I should have had this opened.
No, not to worry. Not to worry at all. You guys have been doing it, like I said before earlier today. Fantastic job on the part of these two ladies here for us here today. So, and that too, I'm relying on Caitlin to advance the slides also. So, my name is Julie MacKenzie. We got that started there, but I'll let Caitlin pull up as she needs. My name is Julie MacKenzie. I'm a egg producer and an agrologist actually in Southwest Saskatchewan. I do quite a bit of work for the Saskatchewan Forage Council, and this is where this project comes in. And when the ladies actually, I think it was Becky, cornered me about speaking about our native seeding project. I said, hey, there's this great tool out here, and I wanted to share this great tool with everyone here today in hopes that you might be able to pass it on to some people that you work with. I know in the conference we have a bunch of folks who helped us develop this tool, and a big shout out to all of you. You know who you are, and could not do it without you. So I'm going to speak about Forage UPick today. It's an interactive forage selection tool for Western Canada. Next.
Go ahead, Julie. We're on the background slide.
Oh, perfect. Great. It just hasn't advanced here. So the Saskatchewan Forage Council developed a dryland forage selection tool over 12 years ago. And we knew that tool was really well used and adopted by many producers, the ministry staff, professors for teaching, all that sort of thing. And we saw that functionality was starting to become an issue, and actually it wouldn't have even been supported now into 2021 with that original version. And so we identified a need to update and implement that new technology. And there was a vision for a Western Canadian tool. And so that vision moved forward, and that tool was created and collaboration began. Next slide. So this is what the dryland forage species adaptation CD actually looked like to start with. It was a CD that we had there, and that's what the tool, what we grew from the Saskatchewan Forage Council there. Next slide.
Sure, 1 second here. Something is... There.
Perfect. And so this is Forage UPick, and Forage UPick was developed with a number of collaborators for Western Canada. It's hosted at upick.beefresearch.ca. It was a collaboration with a lot of support from many different folks, but this is what it looks like, and it's all web-based, and we're going to go into it today. But it's really interesting. As of January 28th, we had over 2,000 users since June 6th, and we're not even in prime seeding or growing season yet. So we've had almost 3,000 sessions be used. So we know it's a tool that's very well received and needed out there. So let's move to the next slide. So this is our partners here. Would be remiss if we didn't mention it. Partners through the Beef Cattle Research Council, Alberta Beef and Forage Grazing Centre, the Sask Forage Council. That's I was the project manager for. The CAP through the BC Ministry of Agriculture used some of their CAP funding to come on side with this. And there's a lot of older or different tools that are kind of rolled into Forage UPick, and you can access them there too. We've had a lot of support from the Peace River Forage Association and the Manitoba folks and Ag Canada. It's just been a great project here. So we'll move to the next slide. And really the number of people who helped out, you'll see a lot of the names here, and many of you are in the room here today, so to speak, but just a great amount of resources that came together. And with this project, all these people came together and would sit on the phone and discuss all these tables of all these forage species characteristics. And if they didn't have something from research, if we didn't know from research, they would be using their practical experience on the ground and coming up with the solution or something that we could all live with for these forage species. And that being said, we'll just flip to the next slide. So Forage UPIC is hosted on the Saskatchewan Forage Council website, and also on the through the Beef Cattle Research Council. It's a home for it. And if for those who don't know, the Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by beef producers across Canada. And so it's a stable organization. So much of the promotion for the beef industry and the learning for the beef industry comes through that great organization there. So I'm going to take you right now. Carolyn's can get it up there. I'm going to take you through the UPIC website just to give you a little snippet of what it can do, and hope you guys might be able to use it for yourself at some point, because, you know, I am excited to share Forage UPIC with you, with it being launched last June. You know, as we get to seeding time, we know there's going to be a buzz about it, and there's going to be more of a buzz about seeding forages. And really, the purpose of this project was, and this having this tool available, is for people to be able to go on it, learn about species, learn what mixes could work for them, and then from there, be able to work with somebody to give them the additional knowledge they knew. It's really a starting point. So we've got Forage UPIC here. You'll see, you know, I guess I want to give you the walkthrough, kind of that sneak peek of everything you can find in the tool. So this is the home page, and Caitlin here is going to be my navigator. I'll just show you how easy it is to navigate. She's a really smart cookie, so don't want to take anything away from her from that. She's been super awesome with this. But this is the home page, and anytime you can get back to this home page by clicking on the Forage UPIC logo from there. So it's got three main areas, and we can mouse over them there just briefly. But there's forages suited to my field, seeding rate calculator, and forage weed management. Really, the first one helps you see what forages are suited to your field. We'll go into that in a second here. We can calculate seeding rates. And then when we look at weeds and forages, we know that economic success can increase in forages with weed control. When I'm talking forages, it's really, you know, those seeded species. And we look at tame species and native species in this tool. We're not going to touch on that part, the weeds and forages today, but there's some great resources in there, and feel free to take a look on your own at another point. So we're going to start here now. We'll start by looking at forages suited to my field part of the tool. So we'll click into the forages suited to my field. From there, we determine where you live. Well, today we're going to live in Saskatchewan, of course. So we'll click on the province of Saskatchewan. And that takes us to a map that has soil zones or regional zones on it. Each of the provincial maps looks like this, and you kind of find where you live. So see, UPIC only starts with a list of forage species that are actually suited to your zone. The forage researchers over the past 60 years have well documented what will thrive under different climatic conditions we see in the different zones. We might see this changing, of course, as we see climate change taking more of a shape on what we can grow in different areas, and that'll have to be evaluated as we move forward in the future. So they're continually revising these lists, and these forage researchers are continually revising what can grow where, and as they learn more. So all those revisions have been added to Forage UPIC. So let's say your farm is between Watrous and Moose Jaw. So we're going to select the dark brown soil zone from that left toolbar there. Perfect. And now we're in the My Field characteristics. So now we're going to look at selection criteria to narrow down on forages that might work in your situation. So these are what the most important things will be to you. Like either in your field or how you want to use your forage. There are 10 criteria to choose from here. A long list there, and if we kind of just scroll up a little bit, you can see all of them. There's 10 of them there. But really, to hit home for yourself or your clients you're working with, is really selecting your top 2 or 3 priorities in your field or about the forage of what you want to grow will really give you the most species results and options to go from. So, for example, there's things like desired stand longevity. That's the time you want the forage species to stay in the stand. There's average time available for regrowth. So that's under normal growing conditions for that soil zone with normal management. It's the potential for recovery between uses. Okay, so really we encourage producers filling this out to be practical and realistic in using this criteria. So we're going to run through one right now. And so what we're going to do, we're going to see what forages are suggested when I want pasture. So we're going to scroll up there under time of use, under purpose, we're going to hit pasture. And then under time of use, we're going to pick summer. So a summer pasture. And I have a field with low to no erosion tendencies. So we're going to do that very little erosion tendencies. You can always use no preference. It sits on no preference and doesn't calculate if we don't have anything there. But so we're going to go very little. So then we're going to scroll to the bottom and we're going to view our results and hit submit there. So view results. So what the matrices inside this program do is it tells us if I want something for pasture in the summertime with low erosion tendencies in the dark brown soil zone, these are all forage species that would be suited to it. And so if we scroll down a little bit there, we'll see actually there's some that are blacked out and those ones are not suited. They're suited for our soil zone, but not suited to that tendency there. So anytime you wish to go back and change a field characteristic, you just need to go to the top and there's a green field characteristic button. You can always change things in there. But let's say what we want to do actually, Caitlin, let's go into the return to my field characteristics. And let's just say we just want native species to come up. So if we scroll down a little bit there and we desired plant type, if we just go native species, so we just want the native species to show up with all those characteristics still, and we scroll down and go to view results again. Awesome, Caitlin. And we'll see we only have native species that match those criteria show up. I want to learn a little bit more about some of these species, and the one I'm going to chat on is green needlegrass. So if we tap on green needlegrass, it gives us the farmer 1, 2, 3 punch. It tells us 3 top things about green needlegrass in plain language so that you can, it's really extension focused language. I like to use that instead of plain language. And then to learn more about it, you can go into full detail if you want there. And it tells us a lot more about green needlegrass. We've got pictures there, and it tells us about like general information, use, yield and quality, and a whole bunch of different things about green needlegrass. And so there's that additional information if you're looking for that sort of thing within this tool. So that's perfect. Thanks, Caitlin. We'll go, if we scroll back up to the top, so every species has this information in it. So scroll back up to the top and we'll go that return to your forage list. So that takes us back to that list we were just on with the species that were suited to our characteristics there. Awesome. For example, if we tapped on purple prairie clover right here on this screen, it will give us that quick 1, 2, 3 punch extension focused language about purple prairie clover and gives us some of those top characteristics. So we can exit out of that cute little green screen there. And we're going to do one little thing to show you how to reset. So we're going to go to that button that says return to my field characteristics. So we're back to our field here. Let's say we have a different field we want to seed. We'll scroll to the bottom and we will clear results. So that puts us all back to no preferences. We're still just in the brown soil, the dark brown soil zone there, hanging out between Moose Jaw and Watrous. But we have another field that we want to look at. And then that field, under salinity, we have a moderately saline field. And there we go, moderate, perfect. And then we also have a field that under flooding, it floods for 1 to 2 weeks a year. So under flooding tendencies, 1 to 2 weeks a year, we have flooding there. And then we're going to hit view results. and see what forage species would have the opportunity to be suited to that area. I mean, these are forages that could grow. We see some natives. I think in that list there may be close to the bottom, but mostly tame species. And the reason you might ask is why there aren't more native species in there. You know, we have a couple in there. What we really did is we wanted to make sure we had species that were available in general use for producers, you know, knowing who our audience is. But also too, we wanted to make sure we weren't going to have species that might be disappointments, and maybe we don't know enough technically yet about establishing them. And one that we did weed out actually was rough fescue, because just the establishment on it to go mainstream, it is really tough at this point, and not something we can have really normal success on there. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to actually head back out. We see that there's lots of tame options there. Caitlin, we'll just head back out to the main page there by going to the Forage You Pick icon. Fantastic. One thing right now, I don't know, Caitlin, I think if we're working through this right now, we maybe, did you want to do the poll questions, or did you want to hold off on that till the end?
We can, they're ready to go.
Perfect. Okay, well, we're going to do a little poll question here, switch it up a little bit. We're going to ask you a question about your seeding this year. Well, feel free to touch there. Are you planning on seeding perennial forages this spring? Yes, for sure native. Yes, for sure tame. No, not at this time. And maybe if those glorious stars align. Oh, we have like 3 star aligners. That's good. That's the category I would fit into there. Perfect. We have about 40 votes in, a couple more coming in. Perfect. Looks like, oh, good. We made it over 50 people. Good job, folks. One or two more coming in. Awesome. Do you want to end the, whoa, a couple more just got on under the wire. Do you want to end the voting there, Caitlin, shortly here? Awesome. Okay, some of you got under the wire, 60 votes. Yeah, we've got quite a few of you. 19% of you, or I guess 26 of you are, yeah, for sure seeding some natives. We got some tame seeding coming in. We've got a lot, and not at this time. And I'm interested if it's economics and weather and those sort of things. I'd be interested to hear in the chat there. And my favorite people are if the stars align. 7 of you. So yeah, let's pray for alignment there. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So one thing I want to point out is those novel forbs and rough fescue are 2 examples of those things not included, but there are species that are only suited to specific provinces too. For example, side oats grama is only within the Manitoba species list, and BC has lots of very, very unique species to them. And so there's some that are just within the BC part of Forage You Pick here. So we're back at this home screen here, and there's lots of opportunity in this tool to generate lists of species, that are suitable to those characteristics of your field. But I think remembering that the key tip is don't overprescribe your field. Focus on your need, your key need, or 2 or 3 needs. Remembering forages are adapted when well managed. I think that's been a lot of discussion throughout the week too. And I think this is a key thing when encouraging more use of native forage species. They're those kings of adaptation, right? And so encouraging that and not narrowing, being too focused, but picking up on those key things that are needed in that planting area. I also want to point out that there is an information tab up at the top, And you can learn more about what makes a mix of a forage species compatible, and what are those additional things in a mix to consider for compatibility besides what the tool tells you as far as characteristics that they match. We are going to move into the calculator right away, but I've got another quick poll here that I was wondering if we could do here too, about who supports you in your forage species choices and seeding rates decisions. So we have lots of people out there that can help us. So, who does support you in those forage species choices and seeding rates? You guys are our practitioners, so I go it alone, government or nonprofit forage agrologists, those retail agrologists or agronomists, or your forage seed sales contact. Who helps you support you in those decisions? Oh, we've got 24 of you voting, 31. They're coming in heavy here. Oh, it's pretty spread out there as far as who helps you out with those decisions. So far, we're pretty well matched between going it alone and working with your forage seed sales contact and your government or nonprofit agrologist. Awesome. That looks great, Caitlin. Let's see where it settles out here by ending that poll. Yeah, sharing results there. Out of 49 of you, 18, like almost 20, go it alone. Another 13 use that government or nonprofit agrologists. And what was the other? Other. We've got some other, and we've got some forage seed sales contacts there. So really, remembering that there's support out there, and I really encourage you to work with a forage agrologist or someone who has that some sort of credentials behind them is really important. So that's perfect. We'll stop sharing that, and we'll move back in to tackle one of the other exciting parts of the tool here now. We're going to briefly go through this here and hopefully get Carol up. I almost feel better going before Carol, because then it's like the build of anticipation to Carol and instead of the coming down afterwards. It was going to be pretty daunting following her up. So yeah, I can't wait to hear that presentation. So here we're going to go into the seeding rate calculator. To me, the seeding rate calculator is about knowing where to start from once you have what you want to seed. So we'll go into the seeding rate calculator there. Awesome. And really, it's about putting the right amount of seed in the ground to have that best possible chance of a good stand. And I'm sure many of you in your roles, you do have seeding calculators you use. This is to help producers and maybe help some of their agrologists that they work with come up with seeding mix. So we have the overall mixture is that first part we come to, and you get to enter your zone. So we've got your zone there. Right now it sits on default dark brown. And you know what, why don't we switch it up a bit? Can we go into black there, Caitlin? So we go into our black soil zone there. Perfect. And there are times you're going to want to adjust your seeding rate, and it's in that increase overall mix area. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down in this seeding rate calculator and enter our first forage species. And we're going to seed a mixture today of 20% purple prairie clover, 40% green needlegrass, and 40% northern wheatgrass, I think. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select a forage to seed. And our first one's going to be purple prairie clover here, Caitlin. And we've got that one. And what we want to do, that's perfect. And what we want to do is we want to have it 20% of it in our mix here. And what you'll notice is we've got a default Pure Live seed to use, and that's based on the Canadian Seeds Act there. And so if we put 20% in our mix, that's where we're at. And we're going to then add another forage to our mix here. We go down to add a forage. Perfect. And from there, we're going to select that we want to seed what we want to seed there, I think, is we want to seed green needlegrass. We're going to seed green needlegrass at 40%. And it's going to yell at us for a second there. Oh, that one. Yeah, we can just leave it as bare seed. And then just down in the red there is where we want to enter 40%. Perfect. And 40% there. And we're actually going to put a cost in this. And the cost right now of green needlegrass is about $19.52 a pound. And if we enter that, it's going to calculate what our cost of our mix is going to be here as we go along. We also want to add in one more species. We're going to add some northern wheatgrass to our mix. And we can go through the list, scroll into the list there, and northern wheatgrass we want to add. And we also want to add that northern wheatgrass at 40% of our mix. So when I say of our mix, it's that what we want it to show up in the stand as. And so this is the really important part about realizing that. And we're going to add the cost in there too, at $12.48 a pound. That's about what the provincial average was last year there, retail average. And I think I missed the cost of purple prairie clover at the top. Sorry, Caitlin. The purple prairie clover is about $46.45 an acre, or a pound, sorry. Definitely more an acre. And then we're going to scroll down. And this is the neat thing is as we go along, Forage UPIC tells us what a summary is. And within our summary, it tells us in our mix, if I want something to grow and I want to see 20% purple prairie clover and see 40% green needlegrass and 40% northern wheatgrass, this is how many pounds an acre I need to seed. And it's based on seed size. And you'll see, of course, that even though 40% green needlegrass and northern wheatgrass, you'll see that we have different pounds going into the mix, right? That's a pretty standard thing to know, right? We have different seed sizes, so we have different number of seeds per pound, and we can also adjust with our pure live seed, our germination, and we can also too, if we wanted to, scroll up to the top. If we have a really tough field to seed, we've got a place where it's rockier than the moon. And we know we're going to have to increase our overall seeding rate to get a really good catch from our experience. If we increased our overall seeding rate by 20%, the calculator does it for us right there. Awesome. A mouse girl. She's killing it today. We increase that. And if we scroll down, we can see in our summary that we've also increased then overall how much seed we need to put in the ground per acre there. And you'll notice we're dealing in pounds and acres. There's this toggle switch up top. You can switch to kilograms and hectares if you want to, but this is designed for producer use, and in Western Canada, that's how that's the lingo we talk. But I really just want to point out that how important calculating seeding rates is, and calculating pure live seed, and making sure we get the right amount of seed in the ground there. And it's based on soil zone and what some of our targets are. And you can always increase the amount of seed going into the ground there. And calculators are a helpful tool and a helpful starting point, I think. So we'll just go back out into the main page there of Forage UPIC. And I really encourage you guys to fool around with this sometime. There's a lot of information in there, and it describes how the calculations work too, so that you're not left wondering there. And there's been some really great advice. I relied very heavily. I'm going to do a shout out to May here, May Ilsinger. Shout out to her on the amount of just, I call them stupid Julie questions that I'd send her all the time as we were working through this. So, to wrap up here, really, I just want to hit home that the goal of our project was to help producers across Western Canada, taking native seed and tame seed. And we really wanted to see people using good forages. And that's a goal of the Beef Cattle Research Council too, and the forage councils and the forage associations across Western Canada. This tool helps us to select good species for a situation and helps the producers select those good species. There really are more opportunities to use native species. And if we can encourage it mainstream, we get more species out there. Ensuring those seeding rates are adequate to produce healthy, economical, profitable stands is really important. Can't wait for you to try it out. And also stay tuned to the Beef Cattle Research Council and the Forage Council and Alberta beef producers, along with provincial agencies, for promotion of the tool as we roll into spring there. And that is all I have to chat about.
Thank you so much, Julie. You gave me a lot of credit for moving the mouse around. We worked really hard on this presentation to figure out the technology behind it. So thank you very much for taking the time to show us this amazing tool. And I think if I can do it, anyone can do it. We have lots and lots of comments. I'm not sure if you can, I don't think you can see the chat box on your end. Maybe you can. There's tons of comments coming in about how an excellent tool this is. I'm looking forward to using it. They're wondering if there's a rain button where you can order the amount of rainfall. Is that a thing?
Sure. You know what? We'll get right on that. It's one that was missed. We need to include that.
Yeah. That'd be the next project, right?
Yeah. Can the person add their own cost of seed? Yeah, you definitely can add your own cost of seed for sure. And I guess one of the questions was, does this tool have any plans of incorporating potential changing seeding zones as a result of climate change? You know, that's always the opportunity. And the great thing about how we design this platform is that we can easily go in and we can make adjustments to it. So if we need to, we can adjust those zones, or we can adjust what suitability. All we have to do is plug in a species. If, let's, for example, let's say big blue stem was going to become widely adapted a whole bunch of other places, we can easily plop it into the brown soil zone of Southwest Saskatchewan, for example. So yeah, and it is actually, they're looking at bringing it to Eastern Canada too.
Awesome. We have a question I just put on the screen. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's from Heather. This seems like it would be a great tool for landowners who may want to grow species on their land, not only for forage, but also for native species reclamation, wildlife, pollinator habitat, species at risk management, etc. Just wondering if there is discussion on modifying this tool for other potential uses.
There always is the opportunity to modify it for other uses and include other things in it. You know, that always comes down, honestly, to funding and who can support a tool, and how those things can be supported in a tool. So we discussed adding annuals in there. You know, pollinators. There's a lot of discussion about pollinators and annuals right now. We really felt, though, that the research behind it for Western Canada, there wasn't enough at this point, and we know it will come eventually.
Thanks for that answer. Rebecca is wondering if this wonderful tool has, if there's any plans to incorporate potentially changing seed zones as the result of climate change. Have you thought about climate change with this tool?
We have the ability to definitely change the species within a zone as they become more adapted, or as our zones change. The platform would allow it as it would develop and age.
Okay, and we've got Rennie's presentation up next. Rennie will be leading a discussion group right after his presentation. So we're going to push that back a little bit because he can't be in two virtual places at once, unfortunately. So I'm sure most people in this group know Rennie Reels. He's an avid member, or very active member, of our Restoration Reclamation Workshop Planning Group, Planning Committee. And today, Rennie will be talking about planning a restoration project, sourcing information outside of the cookbook. And you can take it away, Rennie.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so coming in after Carol, yeah, I'm sort of the last person of the day and coming after a great speaker. So she did a great job, and there's a lot of notes I took after her discussion. Yeah, so I was asked to talk about sort of sourcing information, and Julie's talk with the Forage UPIC tool is actually a great tool, and is actually one of the many tools that we can look at for doing restoration projects. I'm going to skip the Meewasin stuff because I covered it before. This morning when I talked about the 8 principles of ecological restoration that the Society of Ecological Restoration put together in 2019. Sort of the step 2 in those 8 principles was looking at drawing on many types of knowledge as possible as part of designing your restoration project. So, and that includes everything, as you can see from this slide under knowledge and enrichment, the traditional ecological knowledge, so things like what Carol was talking about, was incorporating that into your planning. Also incorporating that Western science as well. So using the current research or as well into your planning documents. And then also innovative knowledge as well. So is there new concepts out there or new thinking that's occurring that you may want to incorporate? You know, the movement right now on soil mycorrhizae in restoration, you know, when I first started my career, it wasn't even considered. And now there's information there and technology there to look at that. As part of the Society for Ecological Restoration, they do have their sort of 5-star program as well for looking at knowledge enrichment as part of your restoration planning. And, you know, the more knowledge that you bring in to your planning project, the better your planning project will be. And so you can do your basic cookbook restoration project and you know, it'll still be successful, but the more that you apply, the greater success you'll probably have in your project. For myself, these are sort of my cookbooks. These are, you know, some of these are fairly old documents, you know, dating back many years. The yellow binder that Ducks Limited put together in the 1990s really takes a strong agronomic approach. The John Morgan book for restoring native grasslands came out in the late 1990s, and then Native Plant Society puts together some books, and then also Canadian Wildlife Service, and then Nora Stewart, who's had a business here in southeastern Saskatchewan on native wildflower seeds and grasses before she retired, published a book on her work. In Alberta, there's tons of resources available from the province and other resources, and you know, I think a lot of us have our bookshelves full of these books. Fortunately, a lot of these books are now available online and do provide us a source of good foundational knowledge on restoration. However, there's new information available that we can access that quite often we wouldn't have been able to access even 5 years ago, and different things that I'll sort of cover fairly quickly here. So there's different databases and different platforms in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And here in Saskatchewan, we have a database called Habisask, and it's ran through the Ministry of Environment. This database looks at everything. You have access to soils data, data on wildlife species, on air photos, cadastrals, and a whole bunch of different data sources that you can pull in as part of your planning process. Instead of having to pull out the old black and white air photos and try and figure out what soil zone you are in and pulling up old soils maps, some of these new online platforms provide you some really good detail. I know in Alberta they have there's you know, a good online database for soil information. In Saskatchewan, through the University of Saskatchewan College of Agriculture Soil Science Department, they have a really good online platform as well for zooming right into your quarter section or your parcel that you're looking at and selecting your soils. And so that gives you a really good foundation on where to work from as part of your restoration planning. And like Julie was talking about with that forage you pick, using that information really helps you select your species that you want to use in your restoration. Also, in different provinces, there's vegetation community guides. Alberta and Saskatchewan have them. Manitoba has just rolled theirs out. And these are based on community guides for grassland communities and sort of what your ideal successional state could be in a certain soil zone and soil type. And so in Saskatchewan, these are found on the Prairie Conservation Action Plan website. And they really sort of give you sort of the ideal community state, what these grasslands would look like. And you can use that to help base your restoration design on. And, you know, really useful tool. Jessica just posted on the chat that in the United States, the NRCS has ecological site descriptions. And yeah, those are very detailed and provide really good resources to help guide your work. Also, as part of the there were some discussions the other day about successional models and the state and transition models for succession. And so this is looking at sort of this climax of what an ideal plant community would look like. And so there is some options there to look into these vegetation guides to see what other species would be dominated as, if the site is more disturbed, more grazed, or more or even more rested. And then maybe you might want to incorporate some of those species in there. And so that could help you guide some of the species that you may want to include in the seed designs. Also, Dr. Handel talked about climate change models and incorporating some of these considerations into your species design. Knowing, if we're planning a restoration project and looking out 20, 30, 40 years, there may be some species we may want to add sooner than later, just to help over time these communities to be more successful. And some work that was done here in Saskatchewan by Jeff Thorpe with the Saskatchewan Research Council sort of took a quick look at what potentially could be some of the changes. And I know similar work's been done and more updated work has been done as well in each province and state. But it just sort of gives you an idea of what to maybe plan for. So in the work that Jeff did was he looked at two different models in Saskatchewan, a cooler model and a warm scenario. And so I think the cooler was like 1 to 2 degrees warmer. The warm scenario was 3 to 4 degrees warmer. And you could see these shifts in these plant communities. So if you look at the S on the map, that's Saskatoon. And our traditional vegetation zonation for Saskatoon is a moist mixed grassland just on the edge of the Aspen Parkland. And you can see how that shift could potentially occur. And with that cool scenario. And then if you get that warm scenario, instead of moving from a moist mixed grassland, we start getting some of those vegetation communities from the United States creeping in. And so maybe you want to consider planting some of those species. So maybe incorporating more warm season species in your mixes. So if like here in Saskatoon, maybe it's good to consider maybe a little bit more little blue stem in the mix, knowing that potentially we may need those species in our planning. Also, there's a lot of data in citizen science. There's a lot of apps where people are collecting data on different properties and different sites, and gives you an idea of what's going on in your area. And so this is an example of a site that Meewasin has on the south side of Saskatoon. It's right on the riverbank, but there's an upland site that was restored to native prairie about 15 years ago. But we have a disturbance on that site where we put a trail in. And so now next spring, me and my team are going to go in there and seed it to native grass, those disturbed areas, and some wildflowers. And so when we pull this citizen science data through these apps, we find some interesting things. There's actually records on the site for bobolink and Sprague's pipit. And so taking consideration of maybe some of these more rare or endangered species on these sites will help us plan for maybe what we need to consider for sort of species mix or desired end use as well. So maybe we design our mix to provide habitat for those grassland bird species and then put in management strategies also to assist them. So what's neat with this, though, when I had my colleague Giselle pulled the data for me yesterday, we've had 8,500 nearly 8,400 records just from two data sources, iNaturalist, which you can record any plant, bird, wildlife, insect species, and then eBird is sort of the database for bird observations. And so it's quite neat when you start looking at these records. And so eBird alone has 180 bird species that were identified on this site. And you can see on those dots on the map, those are where individual records were taken through that citizen science. So it gives you some really good perspectives, and you can zoom out to a larger area or, as well, and see what's going on in your area. Also, there's an app in Kelly Cooley, when he was speaking earlier in the week, he was saying in Alberta they use a system called EdMaps. Here in Saskatchewan, we use IMAP invasives for recording our invasive species. And so this gives you an idea of what maybe some of the threat issues are in this area for when you're designing your management strategies, and maybe designing how resistant to invasion you may want to consider your plantings. So on this site, along the riverbank down a steep slope, we have a really severe infestation of leafy spurge. But up in the uplands where we've done our restoration work, we have a really heavy infestation of nodding thistle. So as we're designing our restoration plan for the site, we have to budget and factor in the need to control this nodding thistle on the site, and watch for things like leafy spurge moving in. In Manitoba, my understanding is EdMaps is being used in Manitoba, and it's a citizen science app as well. And so there is, that was a question from Allison. So there is EdMaps being used in Manitoba. And for like myself, I check this data quite a bit, and in terms of Meewasin, we store our data both in these citizen science apps and IMAP invasives, so we can share our data with other partners as well. So Carol did an excellent job speaking about traditional knowledge and knowledge keepers and sharing her stories, and Nathan Cardinal as well this morning talked about that. And myself, I come from that Western science perspective. I have a degree in plant ecology. I did research for several years. So I have that Western science knowledge. But however, I've been finding as I'm getting older in my career, I'm starting to incorporate more of that traditional knowledge into my thinking. And some of it is my own observations that I'm starting to glean as I'm spending time out in nature. But also from stories that are being shared with me. And it's stories shared from knowledge keepers and elders, but also with even talking with ranchers and landowners, people who've been on the land for generations. They do have stories that they can share. And in trying to incorporate some of these stories and knowledge into your designs will make things, you might be able to incorporate some of that. As part of maybe this site that you're working on may have traditionally been used as, like Carol was talking about, the beavers provided habitat for moose habitat in the spring, or for the calving season. So maybe taking that knowledge and incorporating that in your restoration, and so maybe you can provide that enhancement for that site for those wildlife species as well. So, it's always good to look at other factors when you're designing these things. However, there's such limited, it's really hard to access some of that traditional knowledge. And unless you are working closely with a community or an elder or a knowledge keeper, it's hard for some of us with the Western science background to access this data. There is, however, more information becoming available. This is 2 documents that have been published by the Gabriel Dumont Institute in Saskatoon on sharing some of those stories from the Métis perspective. The one here, the plants growing along the river, this is actually a lady that owns land, Roberta Cross, along the river lots near Batoche. And she engaged elders and the Gabriel Dumont Institute to help document the species on her land and share some of those stories. And so, she's using that information to help manage her land. And so there's definitely opportunities to, find those partners, to develop those relationships to help that with your restoration project. So, some take-home messages. There's various data sources now available online, which is great. It's so much easier to access data. Things like the forage you pick are very helpful. And a lot of the resources and books are available on different websites like the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan. You can access them there. The citizen science databases do provide some additional information to the site, and that you can access. And it's people that are out there collecting this data and sharing this data for the benefit of all of us. And so we can use that to help with our planning. You may want to consider climate change as part of your future planning, and maybe looking at some of the models and projections and see if that's something you want to incorporate into your seed mixes and your designs, especially if you're looking at a long-term project. And then, of course, this knowledge and stories, trying to incorporate that into your restoration plans. Myself and some of my colleagues here at Meewasin, we've worked with some elders over the years, and Kathy, who runs our horticulture program, she does a lot of collecting of wildflower and native plant seed. She worked with an elder that wanted us to leave offerings every time we collect seed, and so we leave tobacco and say a little prayer every time we do that. And so that was part of that gift that elder shared with us. Also, in terms of the prescribed burning, I had an elder share a story with me about fire in his community. And so what he asked me is, every time we do a prescribed fire on our sites, is to leave an offering and say a prayer. And so we've incorporated that into our resource management work. We're still learning a lot, but we're finding that it creates a better connection for us with the land and provides us with a lot of more information as well. And if you look in the chat section there's a lot of information being talked about with ed maps and invasive species and iNaturalists. So thanks, May and Sarah, for taking those conversations. So I guess with that, I'll pass it over to Caitlin for questions.
Thank you so much for the awesome presentation, Rennie. I think you did it in record time. Yes, and there's been lots of really good discussion happening in the chat box here. So if anybody's interested, you can just send in a question and we can put it up on the big screen here. And I think there's been some answers too about some of the issues or about invasives and IMAP invasives in Manitoba. I'll just post one from May. She says, excellent perspective and approach, Rennie, and I second that. Ian is wondering, do any of the Sask mapping platforms, HabiSask, SKSIS, have rangeland ecoregions on them? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, and I think the HabiSask does have it on their database, and so it's based on soil type. Some work that Jeff Thorpe actually put together with Saskatchewan Research Council. So I think that's available in HabiSask. So it is part of that data layer. Yeah, with HabiSask, there's a lot of data layers in there, and you can spend a lot of time looking at a lot of data.
I bet. Jessica is wondering, is a community guide like ecological site description in the US led by NRCS? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, very similar, just a different approach, but yeah, they're very similar. We Canadianized it here in Saskatchewan and borrowed the concept from Alberta. So, and then if my understanding is correct, I think Manitoba or Alberta looked at it from Montana. So yeah, we all use the same precedent.
Awesome. Good to hear. It's nice when you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's all the questions that are in the chat box there that haven't been replied to. It looks like people are helping to provide answers to others, which is awesome. So I think with that, we'll call it a day. I know, Rennie, you've got to head over to your discussion session. I also want to mention that Meewasin has a couple of posters in the poster session. So feel free to head over there and check it out along with all the other posters. So thanks so much, everyone. And sorry about the technical issues earlier. I'm glad we got those resolved. The recording for this session will be available in probably tomorrow or the near future. It's going to take us a little bit of editing too before we post it. So thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.